This is not just a review. This is a confession of an initiate. On this week's episode of Beating a Dead Horse, we have none other than the Divergent series. You could probably find way more things that are said about this series than things that are unsaid. It has become a punching bag online after the internet woke up and remembered that Divergent used to exist at around the year of 2020, and you cannot exactly say that none of it is unearned. The series is 3 movies wide and paper-thin deep, each just so ever worse than the last one. It has also been the subject of all sorts of comparisons and epithets. A cheap version of the Hunger Games, a knockoff of The Giver it has been called, and all sorts of things. A failure, a flop, a cautionary tale. And yes, I do happen to agree with that. But here's the thing. Divergent is actually my very first contact with this young adult wave that includes the likes of The Hunger Games, Maze Runner, or whatever else is out there. I saw the Divergent movie first before anything else, and I was still like 13 and I was actually impressed. If you think that would go on to make me a defender of this franchise, no. It just sucked way more than it should have when this franchise went down the drain and I held a front row seat. But since it was quite significant to me personally, at least for a time, I shall take this moment to be a pick-me and deliver a retelling of this franchise through the lens of a random dude online. Consider this an account of a hardened former initiate who was in the trenches along with all the other chocolate cake eating girlies. So buckle up and prepare to listen to a take that no one asked for, delivered by some nobody on YouTube about a franchise that has lost its relevance a decade ago. Let's go. So the story goes that the author of the Divergent books, Veronica Roth, managed to write the first book in 50 days. Make of that information as you may. Lionsgate moved real fast on that one, and before the first book was even released, the studio acquired the rights to the movies. The book then goes on to become popular, hits the bestsellers lists, all is fine and dandy. Lionsgate also proceeds to give it a modest budget. Initially it had a budget of $14 million, but Lionsgate saw how well Hunger Games went and doubled that. Which doesn't help Divergent in beating the knockoff allegations, but anyway. It cast Shailene Woodley as the main hero, Tris Pryor, Theo James as the love interest 4, Kate Winslet as the villain, Janine Matthews. For a budding flop YA franchise, the cast is not that bad. Cut to March of 2014 and the movie releases. And it releases to quite nice financial results. It manages to make $219 million against $85 million total budget. So what is the movie actually about? Well, the answer is a bit of a mangled mess, to put it lightly. So we have a post-apocalyptic world where Chicago is the only city left. The city is surrounded by a big wall that keeps everyone inside, that protects them against the boogeyman that is outside the wall. Every citizen of Chicago is divided into one of 5 factions: Erudite, Dauntless, Candor, Amity, and Abnegation. Abnegation is the most oppressed faction because everyone keeps calling them stiffs and they keep catching strays from Erudite. Then there are ultra special people who can belong in 2 or more factions at the same time, called Divergents, but they are kind of illegal because the government said so. So our main character, a 16-year-old girlie named Beatrice Pryor, is both from Abnegation and is a Divergent, because we have to have our underdog young adult heroine who is ultra special, so it is a double whammy for her. The movie opens right before a special ceremony. At 16 years old, people can decide to change factions, and then they have to live with a decision they made at 16 for the rest of their lives. So Tris chooses to go from the bland faction to the cool faction, aka the Dauntless, and then we see her journey. All in all, it is pretty easy to see why, for a moment there, it caught the attention of a considerable chunk of audiences. It checks quite a few boxes in the tropes commonly associated with YA. It also has a romance in there. And it also had the faction system that every person could fanfiction themselves into by doing a BuzzFeed quiz. It has all the elements of a Pinterest fangirl inspo board. For the record, I was always sorted into Erudite, so... So what the hell is wrong with the movie? Well, pretty much everything, honestly, at least writing-wise. So the world building of this universe has already been dragged by the jockstrap by the entire internet. So now it is my time on the ride, because I feel like I deserve that. So the main thing about this system is that people are sorted by the core virtue that the person possesses. In this universe, you can either be kind, intelligent, brave, honest, or selfless, but apparently you cannot be both or more at the same time, because that makes you a social deviant. Obviously, this is a pretty frigging stupid system. Science fiction as a genre isn't exactly devoid of engaging in hyperboles, but this is just next level. You don't have to be some genius to understand that these supposed virtues rarely, if ever exist in isolation from each other. Like, are we supposed to actually believe that only erudite are intelligent? Is every other faction just bordering on illiteracy while erudite toil away learning? Or is everyone else just cowards because Dauntless takes up all the bravery bandwidth? Does a person from Candor who shows a modicum of kindness become a divergent and therefore a threat of society? And this really reaches the peak of stupidity in a scene between our male love interest and the special main character, where the love interest says that actually he doesn't want to be just brave, maybe he kinda sorta low-key doesn't want to be an idiot too.
I don't want to be just one thing. I want to be brave, and I want to be selfless, intelligent, and honest, and kind.
You also have to acknowledge just how contradictory the entire faction system is. Each faction is constantly exposed to each other, and apparently they have to strictly obey by their core personality trait, and God forbid they adopt anything from the other factions by constantly being in contact with them. Which, I mean, it would be kinda fair if the endgame of this little shebang wasn't the divergence as revealed later in the future. Where did he even get the concept of divergence from to demonize? It is an endlessly contradictory system that really has no rhyme nor reason, and it really exposes just how exactly the world of Divergent operates. Because truly, when you get down to it, it has absolutely no unifying idea. Just as befitting a piece of speculative fiction, it raises a lot of questions, but the problem is that it has answers to none of them. And for all the dragging that this series has received for its world building, it is not like nothing could be salvaged. If the source material was even a bit smarter, it could have really dug into how exactly groups of people and societies operate. If the faction system wasn't centered around something as dumb as basic human decency traits, it could have been an interesting exploration of how things such as groupthink forms, how the dynamics of in-groups and out-groups work, of how we adopt certain practices and viewpoints without question at what point do we begin questioning the things that we believe in and what causes it, what part does our identity and self-esteem play in the things that we do, and how our self-esteem and identity are leveraged against our need to belong. That is just some basic sociometer theory by Leary and Baumeister for you. I feel like what the series does not get enough flack for, and the main blind spot in the series, is that it is hell-bent on focusing on the divergent and science fiction-y things, whereas it would have benefited a ton from focusing on the social dynamics instead. You can also give Divergent extra charity in recognizing that it does stumble into relevant concepts from sociology. We do see signs of different ceremonies, traditions, and customs across the faction system that do help to create a sense of identity within its members, but these are more so byproducts of just some common sense and recognizing basic concepts in life rather than conscious attempts at saying something deeper. It's like there was so much material out there to potentially explore, but Divergent very specifically chooses to not engage in any form of that. But on the other hand, you cannot deny that there was a certain appeal in what Divergent delivers. Sure, it is not a completely accurate representation of how societies behave, but I would wager it never really aimed to be. If anything, the Divergent world is just a very specific vessel to portray something else, and that is pretty evident in what themes the movie touches upon. The faction system and the existence of Divergence is better viewed in the service of the themes of identity and belonging, rather than other way around. For the target audience, it is not hard to see the connections to what the young people watching the movie might be relating to. Just look at the choosing ceremony as a representation of slowly growing up and having to be more and more independent, or choice between factions as a formation of an identity and issues that come with it. Or the fact that Triss is a Divergent as an experience of being different from others and finding ways of surviving in that world. And I feel as though that as much as the world of Divergent is flawed, and it is truly deeply flawed, the flaws can sometimes be overlooked by the core audience as long as the story itself resonates. And yeah, for me it did resonate. I am certainly not ashamed to admit that, and I will always hold at least some appreciation towards Divergent for that. And this, for me, is only one of the things that made me gravitate towards Divergent. There is another though. Yes, the movie isn't a bastion of originality or ingenuity, but at least it is a competently made movie. Even if the cinematography can be a bit bland, it is a movie that has quite an immersive atmosphere and vision. The futuristic world isn't overly exaggerated. It is mostly grounded and it does feel kind of organic. It may be turd, but at least it is a polished one. It is a very decent movie if you don't think about anything at all. If anything, this movie does rather well with what it is given. So what happened? Well, so a funny thing happens after the first one is out and done. This is the 2010s we're talking about, and popular YA adaptations are seen as the cinematic gold rush of that day. Another popular franchise coming from Lionsgate, The Hunger Games, released its third film the same year as Divergent came out, and the next year would see the release of its last. Lionsgate is, understandably, desperate to cash in on the clearly evident wave of popularity that YA dystopias has, as clearly evidenced by The Hunger Games, so they certainly did not not one to just sit around and wait. They had some lofty ideas for Divergent, which were very misguided from the very beginning. So there are two reasons primarily that can be outlined as to why the series went down the gutter. And the first one is quite simple. Divergent simply didn't have anywhere to go really after the first book and movie. The first movie and book both made a nice standalone thing that would be better left as that, but neither of them are suited as a foundation for a bigger franchise. The core concepts are so stupid that you just cannot give a satisfactory extension to any of that in any way. So the subsequent books that would be adapted would be quite a bit ass either way. But the second reason that really put me off is the direction that the series take in adapting these novels. Because it is ass, I cannot describe to you just how much hate I harbor for whatever comes after the first movie. And this change of direction really comes down to the fact that only the first movie was directed by Neil Burger. Listen, this director really made a competent movie with what he was given. It could have gone real wrong, but surprisingly, it came out decent. And the movie can also just be hella stylish. So what happened was that Lionsgate, in their desperate rush to try and milk this franchise, announced that the next movie, Insurgent, would be coming out about a year after the first movie, in March of 2015. The director said hell no to that, since he was already busy with post-production work of the first film and couldn't manage making Insurgent on top of that. It was a scheduling conflict caused by Lionsgate's greed. Now, to be fair, this situation was not without precedent within the studio. The first Hunger Games movie was directed by a person named Gary Ross, and he also dropped out partially due to scheduling, as Lionsgate also wanted to have the next movie within the Hunger Games franchise the next year. In the case of the Hunger Games, this worked out very well. The change of direction, at least to me, was a vast improvement over the constant shaky cam of the first film, and the follow-up to that, Catching Fire, is still, well, fire. So in all fairness, Lionsgate had all the more evidence to suggest that it could be actually a good move to change directors to meet their own deadline. So to take over the franchise, the studio hired a man by the name of Robert Schwenke. When it was announced though, I distinctly remember going on to IMDb to check out what this person has done before, and it didn't exactly inspire much confidence in me, I have to be honest. And then the trailers began coming out for Insurgent, and while this type of a move worked out for the Hunger Games, the trajectory of the Divergent franchise undertook the direct opposite direction. I just gotta say that Insurgent really does manage to do something right, and that is completely flushing away any redeeming qualities that the last movie had. I cannot describe just how wholesale the change in direction of this franchise was. And now this is going to be a very weird hill to die on, but that is what we do on this channel anyway, but for me, I am quite stringent in how things are presented. I just really value visuals. It's why the first movie was quite digestible for me, but this one, pure garbage. Usually the failure and end of the series is attributed to the last movie, as it is the one who is rated the lowest and severely underperformed in the box office, so it is not that distant of a leap to make. But no, Insurgent is really where the flop starts, not Allegiant. This yee ass movie somehow managed to perform similarly to the first one in terms of numbers, but it did have a bigger budget, which probably went God knows where. And I will be frank, I think it is an absolute miracle that this movie garnered that much, and it probably benefited from the little goodwill that people still had towards both the franchise and the YA dystopian genre in general, because there is no conceivable way that this film should have grossed that much, and it certainly would have been the franchise killer if it wasn't released under such favorable conditions. It is absolutely spectacular how this single movie manages to downgrade the Divergent world in basically every single way, as if that was even possible, but apparently it was. So the director and the cinematographer changed, the soundtrack changed, the writing team changed a bit too, the production design changed, everything basically changed, and all of it was for the worst, except for the soundtrack. That wasn't completely horrible, and I still listen to Holes in the Sky. So anyways, the thing that still upsets me the most, to a very irrational level, is how they approach the technology. I actually really liked how the first movie, even if set in the future, didn't have the stereotypical science fiction hologram-coded look to it. It was very low-key in its presentation. I loved that. This movie, however, goes all out. Now suddenly holograms are everywhere. Technology is straight up futuristic, down to the weapons that the Dauntless use. Like, what the f is that? What happened to simpler weapons they had in the first movie? Or even go ahead and compare how the Erudite HQ looked like between movies. In Divergent, we had this very nice production design, this very slick office or whatever. In Insurgent, suddenly everything is covered in LED lights as if they are decorating for a teen's gaming room. Just in general, the movie looks and feels considerably worse in comparison to the first movie, and I struggle to find even a single frame of this movie that looks nice. There's also just a huge difference in how this movie was shot. The first movie movie's production placed quite a big emphasis on being practical and authentic. Sure, there was CGI in there, but they did a lot of practical stuff and shooting on location. The behind-the-scenes features would confirm as much. They even went as far as to shoot at the actual Navy Pier in Chicago for the scenes set in Navy Pier, Chicago. They were really dedicated to nailing this stuff. And for the record, there seems to be a lot of practical stuff built for Insurgent 2, I guess, but they then proceed to stuff it with CGI, and I mean... Again, I seriously struggle to pick out a single shot that looks great. Most of the cinematography is decent at best, but most of the movie just looks like a cheaply made TV movie, just solely for how they butcher the world. Know that if Insurgent has no haters, that means I am dead. And this is even before we get to them making the world building around Divergent infinitely worse. So this movie introduces this ultra special high-tech box that Triss's parents apparently hid inside their home all along. It is notable that this box is not a thing in the book, but rather a movie invention. And now, not to be an Insurgent apologist, but I kinda like this idea. The box is made up to streamline the plot of Insurgent, which in the book was kinda whack either way, but I think it's one of the better things in the movie. But the way they execute that idea is garbage. So the box contains a secret message from Edith Pryor, our protagonist's great whatever count of great's grandmother. The movie doesn't state who she is, but it is in the book. The message that she delivers is also better in the movie than it is in the book, to be honest. But anyways, in order to open the box, there has to be the super duper special snowflake Divergent that is smart, brave, honest, and kind, and selfless. Now the thing is that both the books and the first movie never really pay special attention to exactly which factions a Divergent can belong to, at least from what I remember. I sure as hell am not going to be rereading these damn books now. Sure, there is a throwaway line in the first movie that kind of does outline which factions Triss could belong to.
Abnegation, and erudite, and dauntless.
But never was there made this huge show and dance about it. This movie, however, decides to be Divergent and think differently. See what I did there? Because now, Divergents are like some Pokemon and have power levels and stats and everything. Oh yeah, and also, do you remember when the first movie did entire simulations to find out which faction people belonged into? Well, tests no more, because now all it takes is to point this shit at people and it just tells you which faction they belong into. Not only that, it also tells you specific factions that a person would belong to if they are a Divergent. Yeah, the first movie tests might have been inconclusive, but this thing is conclusive as fuck. And guess who turns out to be the ultra special one that can open the box all along? Guys, you couldn't possibly guess who it is. Okay, yeah, it was Miss Pryor, which then results in what feels like an endless cycle of simulation scenes that are all just an excuse to have these supposedly exciting scenes as Triss parkours to catch a pipe from a flying house, or when Triss fights herself in a whole CGI nightmare of a scene. So there's just also a very clear and palpable shift in priorities between the last movie and this one. This movie feels like it tries to manufacture any possibility it can to have an action scene, which I guess can be seen as an improvement over the last film, but honestly nah, this movie is just bad, laughably bad. What I really enjoy in this movie is that one of the sims that are presented for Triss is the supposed candor sim. And do you want to know what it is? It is depicted as her and her mom just having a heart-to-heart, and she's honest with her mom.
Mama, I don't want to be Divergent anymore. I just want to feel safe again.
Candor sim complete.
And that is just how she passes the sim, which just further exposes how stupid the entire system is. Like, imagine anyone in a similar sim, or like if Triss just straight up proceeded to lie to her dead mom, and she would not have passed it, but like, what? And then in the very next sim, Forrest says something that she said about him without him having ever heard it, and she's like, wait, I didn't tell you that.
How did you get past security?
You know me, scary boyfriend skills.
You weren't there. You didn't even hear that.
And that is how she passes the intelligence sim. And then the movie says this.
This girl is extraordinary. She's tested positive for 4 factions in one day. No one's gotten that far.
So were all the people before extra stupid or compulsive liars? Anyways, this movie is hot garbage and you cannot convince me otherwise. So we get to the last installment of the Divergent series, Allegiant, the book. Now the book itself was released in 2013. I did have the opportunity to read it before Insurgent, the movie, came out. And let me tell you that I did initially like it somewhat. The ending did leave the 15-year-old me staring at the ceiling for an hour with a finished book on my chest, but the book itself is rather controversial in the fandom for its ending ending primarily, but also because it's just not that well written. So it was extra baffling to learn all the way back in 2014, the year that the first movie came out, that they would be splitting the final movie into 2 parts. And this is what the studio had to say about it according to Variety. Lionsgate Motion Picture Group co-chairman said in a statement that the move makes sense, given that the studio used a similar strategy for Twilight and Hunger Games franchises. Veronica Roth brings her captivating story to a masterful conclusion in Allegiant, a rich action-packed book with material that is ideally suited for 2 strong and fulfilling movies. The execs said, the storytelling arc and world of the characters lend themselves perfectly to 2 films, a storytelling strategy that has worked very well for us on the 2 Twilight Breaking Dawn films, and about which we're tremendously enthusiastic for the 2 upcoming Mockingjay films of the Hunger Games franchise. Tell me you haven't even opened any of the books without telling me you haven't even opened any of the books. Then they proceed to announce that the first of the 2 movies would be called Allegiant, and the second would be called Ascendant. They even released logos and everything. Ascendant's poster reads, "The end is never what you expect," which is particularly ironic considering that the end was indeed what we expected, which was the series getting axed. Until this day, I still have no idea what the hell they meant with Ascendant, because it certainly didn't ascend in the box office numbers. So then we get into the marketing stage for Allegiant, and the marketing stage for Allegiant was kind of funny. There were a couple of very distinct stretches of marketing that I was quite directly engaged in. Now I urge you all to contain your emotions and jealousy when I tell you that I received an email from Triz herself. Yeah, that's right. She was obsessed with me. She wanted me so bad, it's canon. Okay, so before the movie was released, there was an app called the Divergent series fandom, and on that app, there used to be raffles that you could win, and I remember winning one of them, and they shipped me an Allegiant logo tattoo. I swear, if I manage to find that email, I will include it here. But I remember that Tris Pryor herself, on God, wrote to me, and it's true, and I am not lying. Yeah, so basically I was the #1 fan of Allegiant. But the marketing materials that they released for this movie are hysterical. They still crack me up to this day. These materials included inspiring quotes such as, "Some things are hard to let go. Game on. Unbroken. And we're going to see this on a big screen in March." And I just know that I ate that shit up. But the pinnacle of stupidity was reached when they released the damn character portraits. Now, since each movie insists on finding a new and inventive way to downgrade the world building, this time around they introduce yet another way to arbitrarily categorize people. And I mean, look at these. Like, are we announcing these people's rice purity test results, or Caleb, you dirty slut? These percentages never come up in the movie, by the way, which means they were made up just for vibes. Anyways, Lionsgate then does an even funnier thing. They opened a website called the Divergent-series.movie. The website doesn't exist anymore, but thank God there's evidence up there on their Facebook page, because otherwise y'all would think I was bullshitting. But on the website, you were able to enter your name and it would tell you how damaged you were. And that is how a Hollywood studio told me, a teenager, and a bunch of other teenagers that they were damaged. Yeah. And then we get to the movie itself. So this is the only Divergent series movie that I saw in cinemas. Yes, how dare I not have seen the other 2 in all their glory. Hilariously, I still have my ticket from 2016 still hanging around, and I got a little brochure from the cinema and everything, and as a little cherry on top, I guess. So I went on March 20th, 2016, 2 days after the premiere date, and I distinctly remember my first impression upon leaving the theater, and it was very, very, very deep denial, because I dragged people to go to watch this dumpster fire with me, and I was repeating the words, "It's good, it's good," to myself over and over again to try and convince myself that all was fine, because I had to somehow justify victimizing my friends who came because I asked them to come together. It was diabolical. Anyways, so I kind of like how absolutely nothing works in this movie. So let's start with the world building, our favorite topic, because beforehand, they just changed up Chicago. Now it seems as though they changed the planet in which the movie is set. Even when I saw that the movie takes place on Mars from the trailers, I remember frantically Googling what the was that, because I had read the books and I did not remember there being Mars out there beyond the wall. Yeah, remember how the books described characters just flying over regular planes in regular planes? Yeah, well, instead of planes, we get all of that. But there were just so many other dumb changes that make everything just so much worse. There is one change in particular that I always irrationally hated. That is the addition of the city of Providence. This was never in the books. It was a complete invention by the movie, and honestly, just look at it. What the f is that? Then we also get to the Bureau of Genetic Welfare. Yeah, remember when the book just described it being a regular ass frigging airport, because it is? Here, even the book art shows it as a normal building. Yeah, well, be prepared for this huge schlong up in the sky that is supposed to signal that the place is indeed all about genetics. And what really gets to me is that these two locations are so unnecessarily ass and futuristic. You would imagine that the post-apocalyptic society would invest into anything else besides a dumb-ass double helix in the sky. I just don't get why these choices were taken. They didn't even look good then, and they certainly don't look good now, nor would they have ever looked good ever. And this is before we get to the story itself. The movie barely follows books, and it doesn't make the movie better. So the main twist of the movie is that Chicago as a city is an experiment. People in the past messed up genes very badly, and therefore it resulted in damaged people. This is the same in both the movie and the books. They needed factions so that people would breed and mingle and produce people with less bad genes, and those people would be divergent. Obviously, this is a bunch of nonsense because it seems to imply that to be with damaged genes is to have character flaws like lacking intellect and honesty. This is obviously bullshit. But it becomes more bullshit in the movies. The books do have a distinction between genetic damage and whatnot, but it was never completely purist about it. It wasn't really about percentages and stupid shit like that. 4 was not a divergent, yeah, because he only had a specific genetic marker or whatever mumbo-jumbo Veronica Roth came up with. But the book was not all about one individual being this messiah. The movie, however, makes Tris the only one who is the purest being to have ever come into existence. And I mean that literally. The movie makes her dress in white for the majority of it like some messiah and be up in the helix thingy or whatever, while everyone else was on the ground. So for 2 movies in a row, Tris is the ultra special chosen one who can save everyone, do the mission of the day or whatever. Then there's also this very rushed and forced separation arc between 4 and Tris, where 4 is suspicious of the Bureau right off the bat despite spending maybe 5 minutes in the Bureau, and Tris is this very invested director of the Bureau's disciple despite spending maybe 5 minutes in the Bureau. One of the most comedic scenes between them for me is when 4 ends up in a crash in the wild steppes of Mars, and there is Pennywise with him. 4 decides not to return to the Bureau and tells the dude to tell Tris that
I want you to tell him that I left you behind. His interest will know you why.
And then the dude makes it to the Bureau and tells Tris that
4 left me behind.
And then Tris says
4 would never leave anyone behind at the crash site.
as if this is some big character moment or a callback and wasn't made up on the spot by whoever wrote the script. They present this information like 4 is generally known to never leaving anyone at the crash site. Then we also have whatever the hell is happening inside Chicago. The conflict is barely set up, and when they do try to set something up, it is never really anything in depth, and the lines these actors are given are horrible.
I know I said I'd be alone, but I'm not Candor, and I'm not Amity. So I will lie, and I will fight if I have to.
You see these scars? I wasn't born Amity. And I can assure you, I'm not afraid to fight for what I believe in.
Seems like we're 2 peas in a pod.
Then we also get the fact that Peter has literally the same storyline for the 3rd movie in a row. He's probably the most static character in the entire movie franchise, and every movie he does the same thing, aka just be there to bully Tris and then defect to whoever is the villain side of the conflict. In the 2nd movie, he kinda helps out the heroes at the end, but then in the next movie, he does the same shit again. Then we also get to CGI, which was unbelievably bad. Like in some scenes, you could literally see people's hairs and pieces of their heads straight up disappear due to the green screen. Also, this movie probably has the worst extras I have ever seen in a movie ever, period. The line delivery of these background people is either so unconvincing or they straight up sound dead.
It's her. Chris Pryor. She made it.
There is honestly no area in which this movie works properly. Even the actors sometimes feel like they don't care anymore, and I don't blame them. On Rotten Tomatoes, it still has 11% from critics and 41% from audience, and honestly, even that is very generous. The movie ultimately grossed $179 million against a budget of $110 million, which means it not only didn't break even, but it also was a deep loss for Lionsgate. So what happened next? Well, your boy went ahead on Amazon and ordered Allegiant the movie, and not only on DVD, but on Blu-ray, so you know it cost more, and they still have it to this day. Apparently I was a huge fan of Allegiant. I was Allegiant to Allegiant. Get it? So anyways, the people were just sitting around and wondering what the hell would come of the last movie, Ascendant. Initially, they didn't cancel it. They postponed it from March to June of 2017. They also announced a different director. Then when the cast was asked about their participation in the next movie on red carpets and other events, everyone collectively gave responses ranging from politely distancing themselves to outright saying that they wouldn't do it. And then Lionsgate was like, oh, actually, we are just doing a TV movie and we may also do a spin-off series. In the meantime, ya boy engaged in some heavy-duty activism and signed 2 petitions to try and save Ascendant the movie. Which honestly, at this point, I have forgotten about all of this. I don't even know what to say. And then the fandom of 5 people, including me, waited and waited until 2018 when Starz, the network that was supposed to make the movie and the spin-off series, announced that the project would indeed not go forward. The reason being that there was no longer any interest from anyone really, as if that wasn't clear in 2016, and thus the Divergent series faded into obscurity, never to be heard from again. You have to admit though, for a book series that were mediocre at best, it is a miracle that it went on for as long as it did. It sure went nowhere, but attempts were made. Some say that this was the franchise that ultimately killed the YA movie adaptations, and it sure seemed to be the case for a while there. Either way, it's a huge embarrassment, and certainly a good lesson on how not to do, well, everything related to movies. So that is that on the rise and the fall of the Divergent series, and I am off watching Allegiant on Blu-ray.